Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.
Welcome. You are watching Conversations with Jennylyn, formerly known as The Jennylyn Show. And tonight, my guest is Keith Koo. In this Silicon Valley where the tech world is so competitive, Keith is keeping up with the competition. And I cannot wait to share how. Keith, thank you so much for coming on my show.
Jennylyn, thanks for having me.
So, you've done so much, I don't know where to begin. So why don't we let you decide? I know that you have a radio show.
Yes.
And you have a podcast. You've done some work in cryptocurrency and blockchain and so much more. So over to you. Tell us about.
Well, once again, Jennylyn, thanks for having me, and congratulations on the rebranding of the show.
Thank you.
So excited to be here. In order to explain the radio show and the podcast, I first have to go into a little bit about my background, which is over 20 years in corporations, being trained at Wells Fargo, spending most of my career at Cisco in M&A integrating companies, and then in partner management with companies like Cisco, Intuit, and the Bank of Tokyo. We're ultimately working in what's called technology risk. And how that ties into the show is that I started a consulting firm almost 4 years ago called Guardian Insight Group. And that is a boutique firm on technology risk. And most of what we do, we really can't talk about. Whether we're helping a company renegotiate a deal or getting them out of trouble or working on a disaster recovery plan, those are things that are word of mouth and people just seek us out for. The show's an interesting story because close to 2 years ago, KDOW, which is local to the Bay Area, 12:20 a.m., they approached me to do a show, but they didn't know what they wanted the show to be about. They just said, we think you should do a show. So there's some back and forth. The original show was really Guardian Insights, and it was a lot about technology risk. And we noticed that as listeners were picking up, even though we had an underlying theme about keeping companies safe, it was a much broader conversation. It was downloaded in what now is 96 countries and counting. And it was really this theme of whether you're a large corporation like IBM or HP, or you're a unicorn like a Delphix or an Actifio, or you're an aspiring startup, there's a story to be told. And not only is there a story to be told behind the scenes of why did the founders do what they did, how did they get to their decision, but really we talk about in Silicon Valley that the secret sauce for the last 40 years has been human capital, so smart people, great university systems to support that, lots of sharing of information, free flow of ideas, but also the weather.
The weather.
But on another note we talk about a lot is this lack up until now of regulation. So if you think about Intel back in the day, or Apple, or Microsoft, which is really Seattle, none of these companies really had the regulations that we have today, which is really like now Theranos, which we're very familiar with that story, and
Yes.
and how because of what happened with Theranos, regulations continue to increase, oversight continues to increase. So the show is both wanting to get the story out about what's happening in the Valley, but also measured with what are the things that companies need to do to protect themselves and what they need to do to think about to scale and gain momentum.
So how did the blockchain and the cryptocurrency play into this? Is it part of the show?
It's not part of the show. We have lots of shows on blockchain and cryptocurrency.
Okay.
It's part of the consulting aspect. So when we started Guardian Insight Group, the consulting practice, we thought we'd continue to do what we've always done, which is serve large companies, Fortune 500. And we do that. About 2 years ago, back to the concept of startups in the old days didn't care about regulations. Some of the forward-thinking blockchain companies or cryptocurrency companies really did start to think about what does it mean to be regulated? Because if we think about my days at MUFG, the Bank of Tokyo, when Bitcoin was a brand new platform, we looked at Bitcoin as a platform, not necessarily cryptocurrency.
It's been around that long?
Well, cryptographic methods have been around over 40 years for software.
Okay.
Bitcoin has been around for over a decade. It just arguably had its 10th anniversary in the early part of 2019 or the later part of 2018, depending on who you follow. In the fall of 2013, Bitcoin was floating at about $400 a token, and we know that what was it, about a year and a half, the end of 2017, Bitcoin hit close to $20,000 per token. Wow. So all major banks were looking at it as a disruptive technology. What does it mean to us? Is it a currency? Is it not? Right? And these are some of the things that were not yet figured out. I mean, there's over 7 U.S. regulators that have a hand in regulating cryptocurrency or digital assets. We can talk about the IRS, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, Commodity Futures Trading Commission, FINRA, FinCEN, the list just goes on and on. So there are very serious, one of the things I want to be sure about, since you're asking the question about blockchain and cryptocurrency, even on my show, even when the callers leave voicemails, people still think blockchain and cryptocurrency are synonymous. Blockchain is the underlying technology for a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Ethereum. But that doesn't mean that blockchains or all blockchains are cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
So when YStar started coming to us was some of them could see the handwriting on the wall that the technology was, as usual, ahead of regulations. And the more that a Bitcoin, let's say, was moving up in value, or Ethereum was moving up in value, or these other what we called altcoins. So, I mean, there were coins coming out left and right. People were just racing to fundraise, get money, and it really set off a lot of alarms, as it rightly should, with the regulators. So people started coming to us saying, well, how do we work this through?
And this is when you worked in the bank?
This is after I left the bank. I mean,
after you left the bank?
Yeah. So the consulting practice is almost 4 years old. So at the bank, we were evaluating Bitcoin and blockchain as a technology. And we see the fruits of that in the last year or so. Lots of banks have come out talking about what they're doing for blockchain and cryptocurrency. So JP Morgan has a coin. BNY Mellon has talked about it. BNP Paribas has talked about it. Everyone is looking at it because it is potentially disruptive, especially to, let's talk about the millennial generation and younger, who we call the unbanked, right? So these are, there are those in that generation that have never even had a bank account. Some might have a credit card. And so really, they embrace cryptocurrencies and blockchain.
Right.
So, but just going back to the question of blockchain is a legitimate technology. It is, a lot of people think it's hyped because of the cryptocurrency label. And I think once people stop inferring that all blockchains are cryptocurrencies by default, and that cryptocurrencies are also by extension bad because of some of the things that happened earlier in the value, I think that's where things will settle down and people will start to pick the use cases. Go ahead.
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt you,
sure,
but I don't
please.
want to forget to ask you this. Do you think the reason why they've had those interruptions and some of the bad press that they're getting is because it's something new? And like everything new, you have hiccups as you start perfecting it?
Yeah, you make a perfect point, so it's not interrupting. An overused analogy is that blockchain and cryptocurrencies is like the internet of the early 90s. So if you think about internet in the early 90s, even browsers, right? We had Netscape before we had Internet Explorer. And nobody uses Netscape anymore, right? In reality, blockchain is even prior to that, as an analogy, the people who developed internet protocols in the early to mid 80s. These are the people who eventually founded Sun Microsystems or Cisco Systems, and they were experimenting with networking protocols, IP, in their dorm rooms here at Stanford.
Amazing.
There were no rules around that at all back then. So when I talk about blockchain and cryptocurrency, I actually go back even 10 years in the early 90s because that's what it's like. And so the perfect point you're making is that the technology moves faster constantly. So whatever happened back when Intel started the microchips, it moves a lot faster than it did back then.
Got it.
So blockchain is based on open source software. And you or I, anyone who spent a little bit of time, could actually develop their own blockchain. There's no magic to that. It's just sitting down and learning the coding to do that. And
but it's just so hard for people to get the concept. So in order for you to do something, you have. If I'm going to bake a cake, I know what I need to put in it.
Yes.
But if you don't know what it is, and it's still so difficult for people to understand exactly what it is. I don't want to make the show about blockchain and cryptocurrency. We're going to bring you back for that.
Sure.
I want to hear about all the other things that you're doing. I don't want to cut you off in the middle of it, so maybe we can come back to it
Anytime.
before we wrap up.
Yeah.
But tell us about the other stuff you're working on. Like I heard you on the radio last Saturday, and I was listening just by accident. I was doing my Pilates. I listen to the radio when I do that, and I heard you. I'm like, that's Keith. He has to come on my show. Little did I know you'd be here today. But you're working on some other stuff that I want you to share with us.
Sure, thank you. So some of the other things we're working on is the Tulip Conference. So last year was the inaugural Tulip Conference in San Francisco. I'm one of the co-organizers. Last year was a conference on the emergence of blockchain as a technology, not as a cryptocurrency. And we had a lot of press. We had some press releases around the speakers we had back then. So Dr. Vanilla Singh, who's the Chief Medical Officer of the United States, she had given a keynote at our conference regarding the opioid epidemic, and not bring it
Great topic.
back to blockchain, but how she felt that a technology like blockchain could solve for that by keeping track of prescription medicines and keep them out of reach or in a way that couldn't be abused. We had Dr. John Madison, who's the Chief Medical Information Officer at Kaiser Permanente. He's really a futurist, not really even like an information technologist, the way you think about it. And he was talking about the future of healthcare and how within the next 1 or 2 years, there's going to be some great breakthroughs in medical technology that would really impact human lives for the better.
Is this all AI?
Well, Dr. Madison doesn't solely believe in AI.
He doesn't?
No.
Interesting.
Well, what he says is that there's always the human component. So the problem with artificial intelligence, we speak about it often on our show, is that in humans we have confirmation bias. And in systems, we have systems biases. And the reason why we have system biases is because humans are the programmers who develop the systems. And so if the programmer already has a bias, then when they're creating their software application, it will create a bias. And where that really becomes important
Makes a lot of sense.
is where companies are doing a lot in the HR realm, especially, right? So if you're human resources, IBM just talked about it late last year, how they use their AI Watson to write predictive performance reviews.
Yes, I was reading about that.
And you can imagine coming from corporate, if you're in a company with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees, it is very much more efficient to use AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to do the review. But how much people might be concerned about how much abuse could that cause?
And how accurate will it be?
Right. And this is where in the machine learning you need to have models that train what we call your data lake in order to have enough of a sample size to get the right analytics. So back to if your programmers are developing or imprinting their biases into their systems will be biased. A great example of this was Microsoft a couple years back wrote a Twitter bot called Tay. And Tay was launched and Microsoft killed Tay within 24 hours. And why did they kill Tay?
Cause chaos.
Tay became some nefarious, quote unquote hackers figured out how to train Tay because Tay was like a baby. They figured out how to coerce Tay into being the most misogynistic, racist artificial intelligence to ever exist. And so it was just tweeting this vitriol for 24 hours and they couldn't get rid of it, so they just shut it down.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So this is the problem with the internet and the web, because everybody has access.
Yes.
And you can hack into stuff and cause so much chaos.
Right.
But it's also the way we're growing and advancing.
Yeah, it's a new arms race. Mm-hmm. So we know that recently with Facebook, Twitter, and as we're taping this show, Jack Dorsey just met with President Trump about. They didn't disclose everything they talked about, but the assumption is that there was some consternation by President Trump that he was losing Twitter followers.
Yeah, I heard that on the radio too.
But whether he's really losing Twitter followers or not, because Jack Dorsey says he's losing followers too, it's this branding of fake news. And so in order to combat the fake news, companies like Facebook and Twitter are hiring armies of people and producing more software to detect fake news, right? So back to, as people figure out how to...
Well, because they're losing face, because people are not taking anything seriously that comes via that tunnel, because they figure it's fake. And it's true. I remember a few times I saw things posted on Facebook, and I reposted it because I bought into it. And then within 10 minutes, I got like a barrage of stuff like, that's not real, that's fake. And then I go pull it down. So after a while, I just stopped reading anything there, because how do you determine if it's fake or not?
Right. And that's the challenge that social media companies face. And that's why people are, we don't know how they'll do it yet, but people are thinking, well, maybe social media can be solved with an immutable blockchain. Because if I know of one company that is working on blockchain to authenticate users who write entries into the blockchain version of Wikipedia called Everpedia. So in order for Jennylyn to write or blog on Everpedia, you have to authenticate through a blockchain mechanism. So even if you're anonymous, even if you created a persona for you, it won't allow you access unless it can confirm that you are your anonymous persona over and over again. And that way, with the consistency, it'll know that it's you.
I thought blockchain was only used for money.
No.
See, that's what I'm saying. Well, you got to come back and do a
you don't want to make the show about blockchain, but no, I'll say it now. It's way beyond. Yeah.
And I think I'm not the only one who perceives the whole blockchain thing around, currency and exchanging money.
Right.
So, yeah, we have to do a segment.
Absolutely.
Because you have to come back here with a very simple form so the average person can get it. Because I have done a segment on blockchain. 2 people actually addressed it. And I said, I feel like a dummy. I still don't get it. And he told me, think of a rug on your floor, like this rug. Every single strand in it is a blockchain. He said to think of it that way, and I did. It still didn't make sense.
Yeah, that is overcomplicated. What I would say the value of blockchain is it solves for... So double entry accounting has been around since the Medici Bank in the 1400s. Or, because I'm of Chinese origin, it's rumored that the Chinese had this hundreds of years before that. Triple entry accounting, so a trustless system. So why blockchain is important, not just as money, but in medicine, in supply chain, in logistics, in retail, is that you can do transactions without an intermediary. It's automatic. So you don't need to prove, like if I'm going to export a handbag from Italy over to here, I know it's a real handbag, right? I don't need to worry that's a counterfeit, because on the blockchain I can register it at Gucci and say that's a real handbag that came out of the factory from Gucci.
So it's kind of like a brand. It's like Cartier. They ran their jewelry with Cartier, but you could copy that, I guess. Right.
So if you do it, so the promise of a blockchain technology is, if implemented correctly, it can get rid of counterfeiting.
Aha.
Right. So that's really, forget the technology, the woven rug, because they're just trying to explain blocks to you, which most people don't need to care about. Nobody cares about how their internet browser works, right?
Right. That's why I was confused.
20 years ago, we had to use HTML code. Now you can just drag and drop. So I don't really care to explain too much about the technology unless somebody needs it proven at why the technology works. For the average viewer or listener, it's that once blockchain's solved for, it's an immutable record that cannot be changed.
Got it. So can you believe it? Whenever someone is making me smarter, time flies. We're like less than 10 minutes. And I want to make sure that we cover all the important, all of this is important, but I want to make sure we don't miss anything.
Okay.
So you're doing your radio show and you have this company.
Yeah.
Where how is the company linked to the radio show? Or is it?
It's not really.
Okay.
Because I can't talk about the work that we do at the company.
Okay, the secret company.
It's not a secret company. It's out there. But if you find us, you're usually coming to us with, hey, Keith, we're in trouble with our software licensing from XYZ major company. Can you get us out of trouble? Or we need to figure out how to save our budget because we have to drop our operating expense by X percentage. Or we're under a security audit, or we are a company that's being evaluated by another company called a vendor risk or a third-party risk assessment, and we have no idea how to get through there, therefore we can't get a deal done.
So you're like a solutions company.
Yeah, we're fixers.
You're a fixer. You're like a carpenter for everything else. Okay. So you have that company, you're doing the radio show, and what else are you doing?
Well, I do a lot of startup mentoring. That's mostly for fun. It's also giving back. And then I'm also involved with quite a few nonprofits. Okay. So I'm on the board of the Asian Business League, which is the oldest Asian American professional organization in Northern California. It started off when, even in San Francisco, there wasn't, in the early 80s, when Vincent Chin was killed in Michigan, because people thought he was Japanese, but he was really Chinese. That organization grew and became very philanthropic. So we now do leadership development and youth development, and we connect businesses with people. I'm also on the board of the Silicon Valley Chinese Tech Business Association. The joke there is that I don't speak Chinese. I understand 3 dialects, but I don't speak it. So I'm like the only non-Chinese speaker. But really for that, there's a lot of founders in the Valley of, it's the only group I know of where, in terms of the major Chinese groups, so mainland Chinese, Taiwanese, and Hong Kong folks, they all get along pretty well. And we do lots of philanthropic events as well. We have on May 31st at San Jose City Hall, we have a completely free to the public 6th annual San Jose Smart City Conference. So you can come to svin.biz, our website, to find out more information.
What drives you? Some people do nothing and you do so much. Tell me, where does that come from?
Well, the giving back aspect has always been core to me. I'm a man of faith. And so giving back has always been a part of my upbringing. In that
faith, as in a particular religion?
We're Christians. So my family are Christians.
Woohoo! Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So my great-grandparents, interesting story is my great-grandparents on my mother's side were missionaries. They came to the United States to both go to seminary and medical school. So my great-grandmother is one of the first Chinese women trained in the U.S. with medical degree.
Oh, that's
and then went back
awesome.
to Shanghai. Yeah.
That's great. So you've come from people that are driven.
Absolutely.
That's really great. And so you can, what is your goal?
My goals are several. One was that to understand that all companies, big or small, when I talk about the purpose of Silicon Valley Insider and I talk about Guardian Insight, is that big or small, you have the similar challenges. You have to understand who your customers are, who your ecosystem is, who your partners. And then once you figure that out, you can be very successful. I think a lot of people get stuck at a certain point in their growth and trajectory. And for large companies, what's happening now is even the largest, you can see they stagnate. So you have the small companies trying to grow and you have the large companies trying to stagnate. Is how do I help them understand that curve? Whether it's really this concept of disruption that's spoken so often here in Silicon Valley.
With your experience dealing with these companies, do you find it's the same cause? It's the same reason that cause companies to stagnate? A lot of times people they come up with a wall. Personally, when I see a wall, I'm like, how the hell am I getting over that? I'm getting over. I'm jumping over, I'm going around. But some people see the wall and they stop. And they either just stand still or they turn back. Have you found in your experience helping companies, which of the two have you found is more common?
Well, I find what's really common with large companies, and you'll notice that most companies don't survive 100 years, right? Very few, even the greatest American companies, is that they don't see the curve. They don't see the shift. They don't pivot in time. On my radio show, at the end of every segment, every show, we do a segment called The Pivot, and we highlight companies, good or bad, doing changes. So Guy Kawasaki does a great shtick when he explains this, that if you were getting ice hundreds of years ago, you would carve ice out of a lake, take a block out, and drag it back with you, right? And ice men, if that's what they're called, were displaced by barn refrigeration. So they found a way to keep a barn cool. You could store blocks of ice in the barns. But then refrigerators displaced those barns. But every step of the way, the people that were in charge of those businesses at the time could have shifted, right? We can see it where Kodak's a great example where they had lots of digital technology available, but yet they were so invested in film that they let the digital photo thing pass them by. So that's what I think. With large companies, they often miss what's going to disrupt them out of existence. For small companies, they're right now with the regulations, they're underestimating how difficult it is, especially if you're in any regulated industry. So fintech, insurtech, regtech, medical, automotive. Anything that deals with data and privacy is now being regulated.
Can you believe it? We're down to 2 minutes. Before we go, what legacy do you want to leave behind?
My legacy is I want, the first one is for my kids. I think that we're in a shift right now with education. I think we're in a shift right now with everything we know about how things have happened up to this point in time. And the key is that my grandfather was an accountant, my dad was an accountant, I wasn't going to be an accountant. Not that there's anything wrong with being an accountant. I want my kids and people that I'm interacting with to basically write their own path.
Awesome. So I took you all over the place. Did you notice? We covered a little bit of everything. So next time you come back, we will deal with one topic.
Yeah.
I am so grateful that you were able to make it here on such last-minute invitation. I owe you big time.
Jennylyn, thanks for having me, and you're invited on my show anytime.
Before we go, really quick, what do you want to leave it with my viewers? Because we're down to a minute. Really quick.
All right. Well, to get a hold of me, if you have an idea you want on my show, or if you want to reach out about some issue you're dealing with, you can email, the easiest way is to email us at info@svin.biz. You can find me on Facebook as keithkoo.sv, on LinkedIn as Keith Koo, and I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. Hopefully, this is a conversation that will educate and inspire you, and I will see you next time. Thank you. Thank you.
Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.